Hi there and welcome everyone. My name is Dan Fell. I'm the Chief Executive of Doncaster Chamber of Commerce, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the live version of this morning's event. Today we're a small but well-formed audience, but this event is being recorded and then will be shared with the broader business community on demand afterwards, so we'll have a much bigger reach beyond those of us who are joining for the live session. Don't think we're quite going to make it to the giddy heights of the iPlayer or Netflix, but I think we'll be on the Chamber's various websites and easily accessible, and we will be sharing links to this via social media, and we should be relatively easy to find if you want to talk to your friends, colleagues, networks about this event and the content and introduce people to it. So I'm Dan Fell, I'm the Chief Executive of the Chamber. I'm joined today by 4 colleagues who are going to be giving updates and presentations in turn. That's Mike Spicer, he's Managing Director of the Policy Department, and he will be the host and your facilitator for the bulk of this event. His colleague, Steve Hughes, Director from Policy Point, who will be presenting the results of the quarterly economic survey. Andy Gates, Assistant Director for External Affairs at Sheffield City Region Mayoral Combined Authority, and Gary Morehouse from Shorts Accountants will be leading us through a presentation on cash flow. So my role this morning is to very briefly provide the context for this event and to introduce you to the Quarterly Economic Survey and what it's all about. So the Quarterly Economic Survey, or QES as it is known, is the UK's largest and most studied business survey, getting near on 10,000 responses per quarter across the UK. And here in South Yorkshire, we're going through a process of slightly rebooting that project via a refreshed partnership between the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority and the South Yorkshire Chambers, who are working better than ever before, collaboratively and collegiately, to amplify business voice in the region and to help the region make better decisions to serve the interests of businesses and the economy. So nationally, that data from the QES is really coveted by the Bank of England, by the Treasury, national media, and really helps to inform national policy decisions. Regionally, that data helps to inform decision-making by Mayor Dan Jarvis, Mayoral Combined Authority, the Local Enterprise Partnership, and the local authorities. And going forward, the data in this survey, we think will be really critical to guiding the region's response to economic recovery post-pandemic. It also allows us to check in on hot topics, burning platform kind of issues, and quickly check the pulse of what business is thinking and feeling about certain key things. Of course, the data we present isn't economic fact. We've got an abundance of that, that's held by the public sector. But what this is a real on-point gauge of business sentiment at any point in time, and therefore it's really valuable when it comes to gauging things like confidence in the area. Also, this process allows for a really robust two-way dialogue between the chambers and our extended family of partners and the business community via a new kind of Ask the Chamber function in the survey, a new partnership with Unlimited magazine, who are kindly co-sponsoring this programme along with Proactive, and via these events and podcasts as well. Finally, I'd suggest that the QES also provides a really practical benchmarking function that allows companies to compare and contrast how they're doing their current position with their peers in the region. So it's a really interesting thing to dive into and see how your business compares with regional averages. And with this in mind, that's why we're putting a real focus on the practicals at these events, drilling into issues that we ask about, such as skills, investment propensity, in today's case, cash flow. So there's some real practical nuggets and takeaways from this, as well as the broader economic and policy thing that goes with this. So delighted to introduce the event. That's probably enough for me to explain what it's all about and what the QES is. So thank you to Gary, Steve, Andy, and Mike for joining us today. And Mike, it's over to you to guide us through the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan. So we wanted to kick off this new event format with a focus on cash flow specifically. And that's because we know from the data that you'll see today and the insights that you'll see today, but also from economic history, that when economies recover from big events, there are opportunities as well as risks when it comes to financial management as we exit these kinds of events. And as I say, you'll certainly see that in the data and the insights that you'll come across today. So there's some points to illustrate that. We would expect cash flow positions to improve along with anything else as the economy grows. But we also know that these kind of big economic events leave a legacy that are sometimes difficult to deal with if you're a company. So in this particular case, we know that a lot of businesses got through the last 15 months by taking on new debt, by entering into new types of agreements with their landlords, for example. And some of those arrangements are going to unwind, go into the future, and that will create new challenges. And again, we can see that in some of the you'll see today. So our speakers today, what they're going to do is give you the lowdown on what all of this means for the economy of South Yorkshire, but also specifically for your business, businesses in South Yorkshire. So before we get started, just a few words about format. So if you're not speaking, if you could keep your mic on mute. We've got an extended Q&A session for all of the speakers today, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to put questions, get a good discussion going around the issues. So if I could ask you to hold on to your question until we enter into that bit of the event, and then there'll be loads of time and opportunity to discuss all of this. So the running order from today, we're going to start with Andy from SCR. He's going to give us a bit of the policy context for South Yorkshire. We're then going to go across to my colleague Steve Hughes, who's going to give you an overview of the results of the QES as they relate to South Yorkshire, and do that little snapshot specifically for cash flow and issues related to it, like prices and so on. We'll then go across to Gary for his section, which is really the kind of, I guess, from my perspective, the real kind of meat of it, which is where we start to go into the practical detail of what businesses can do to manage their cash as we come out of this economic situation. And then we'll go into the Q&A session with all of the speakers involved. And then finally, we'll have reflections from Dan and from Andy on the Q&A section and anything we need to take back. As Dan said, the event is being recorded. So we would, of course, encourage you to share that recording when it's live with everybody that you know, to give us some really supportive social media connection as well, and generally just to be positive and enjoy yourself today. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy to kick us off. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning all. So yeah, Andy Gates, I head up our external affairs function in the city region, so that's working across the mayoral combined authority for the mayor and the local enterprise partnership as well. So, you know, just to be clear, in South Yorkshire, we've got a model where the LEP, the sort of private sector thinking part of the region, is hardwired into the mayoral combined authority, which is the politics. It's a model we're quite proud of, we like, and it enables us to stitch things together in a way that isn't always the case in other parts of the country. The quarterly economic survey is a really important insight tool for us, and I'm really glad that Mike and Chambers and colleagues are working with us on it. We have to be better at taking the insights that come from it and feeding that through into policy, into political advocacy. So when the mayor is speaking to ministers, we're making sure that issues in South Yorkshire are being flagged. We all do that anyway, but it's so important and so valuable that we have some real business insight that's, as Dan says, a kind of here and now rather than sort of model using sort of economic modelling that just sort of looks at what's happened and what might come in the future. This is really good because it tells us what's going on right now. In terms of, it's quite a tough sell really talking about the policy context, because there's so much we don't really know from a national government perspective. We've been waiting for quite a long time for a bit more certainty around levelling up. What does levelling up mean from a Whitehall and national government perspective? We are, as a city region and local authorities, in a place where we're kind of at the, using my sort of colloquial language, at the fag end of a big capital programme. We've spent the money in our pot, and now we're sort of looking at what's coming next. And there's quite a lot coming down the track. And I use that track deliberately because a lot of it is transport funding. But we will, as a city region, over the coming 5-6 years, have some quite considerable investment funds to be putting into the South Yorkshire's economy, principally infrastructure, but not all. Certainly some more resource, I would have thought, around business support and business in direct investment into businesses. And this year as well, it's just worth saying that the Mayoral Combined Authority and LEP now have responsibility for controlling the adult education budget, which is effectively the funding that comes down from government into our colleges and private training providers to fund sort of vocational education for those aged 19 and above. So we now have control of that budget, worth around £40 million a year, which is a significant start in our kind of journey towards properly influencing skills provision at the local level. And I know that's something that chambers have got a huge role to play, and on behalf of and working with businesses to sort of direct vocational education further. So there's lots coming down the track. Pre-election, and no surprise to you, pre-elections, Labour politicians in South Yorkshire wanted to announce a big investment fund, £500 million investment fund, using the benefits of devolution to effectively borrow against a revenue stream that the government have given us for the next 30 years. So that enables us for the first time to create a £500 million investment fund, which doesn't come with any strings attached. It isn't funding coming down from Whitehall with a ring fence on transport or skills or roads or whatever. It is up to us to determine how we invest that. And there's an enormous amount of work going on within the region to determine what the sort of nature of that fund and how we can use it to unlock sort of economic growth. On top of that, we expect in the Chancellor's spending review in autumn for a major injection of capital funding into our transport system, to devolve to the Mayoral Combined Authority and LEP, which is a £500 million transport fund. ICTS is the acronym, Intra-City Transport Settlement. Effectively, for the first time ever, the government have accepted our case that if you keep giving us funding in silos, we'll keep spending it in silos, and we won't do those clever things where you join up funds, where you team and ladle cash where the demand is, in a way that we just haven't had at the regional level the ability to do, and indeed nowhere's had that ability to do. So there's lots going on. Looking to the future, the government are working on a levelling up white paper, which will be their script really for how they intend to deliver on their levelling up agenda. We hope in South Yorkshire, I guess politically, that is less tactical than some of the government's current approaches to levelling up, which are, it's fair to say, heavily focused on red wall places where they think they can get some votes. And we would always argue that that's not the best way to do the way you direct investment. It's the way you might get some votes. It might do some nice things, but it's still not the most effective way of doing it. And really just what I would now like to do very briefly is just sort of give a little bit of a sense of where South Yorkshire's economy is in context of the results we're going to hear in a minute. We are still at a position where 6 to 7% of our workforce are furloughed, and many of you will know that. Rates in those areas worst hit, hospitality and leisure, are falling fast, which is great. But if you're hotel staff or working in the creative sector, travel agencies, numbers aren't really shifting that quickly. So there will be, we know, a cohort of people and businesses who are still heavily reliant on furlough whilst the rest of the economy has kind of moved on. Some positive news around footfall in some of our towns, Barnsley and Doncaster. People are spending more in Barnsley and Doncaster now than they were pre-pandemic, which is astonishing and fantastic. Not replicated in Sheffield or indeed the other big cities across England and the United Kingdom. Footfall in Sheffield is just over 50% of where it was pre-pandemic. Barnsley and Doncaster is at 70%. So the towns are doing all right. The city's still coming through this. What is interesting though is if you look at some of the sort of data coming out of the recruitment firms, is that it's starting to heat up in places like Sheffield. So in terms of job postings, and it will be interesting to see where the data on the survey shows us on that. And then trying to explain a little bit of that around Barnsley and Doncaster. Distribution, logistics, booming. I'm sure that'll come through. You know, the increasing shift to online has helped distribution and logistics, and that's no doubt because it's quite a big part of Barnsley and Doncaster's economy. That's inevitably having an impact. So I suppose that's a whistle stop tour through the policy world. We want some big things to happen in Whitehall to help us do things for our economy. We need them to shift their balance around investing in research and development to really focus on places like South Yorkshire, where we've got underinvested, undercapitalised businesses who could be innovative with some support. We still need the Treasury to follow through on its promise to change its investment model so money doesn't just get shoveled into London and the southeast and cities and places where there's sort of real demand. The more overheating you have, the more the business case for landing cash works in a Treasury model. That doesn't deliver levelling up. And we still need more powers and tools in our toolbox to affect the change we want to see in our economy. And that's true. Whilst we have control over the adult education budget, that 40 million quid a year, we still don't have any real meaningful ability to touch the education system, apprenticeships, traineeships, and all those sorts of things that we'd like to think we could make a difference if we had some skin in the game. But that's it from me, Mike. Happy to speak later on the wrapping up.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. And there's a lot to think about and a lot to reflect on, and I'm sure that will be reflected in the Q&A bit of the session later on. So if I have the control of the PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to put this on the screen and hopefully it will work. Can everybody see the presentation? Yeah. So Steve, I think it's over to you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Is it in presentation mode there? There we go.
Better.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm just going to take you through the headline messages of the quarterly economic survey in South Yorkshire. Now, this is for Q2 2021, so the start of April to the end of June. So we asked firms what they were thinking and what their experiences were within that period. And these periods are quite important in terms of when firms respond to these, which I'll explain a little bit about later. But the overall message is that there are a lot of positive signs in the results. Sales and orders, both domestically and in export terms, indicate growth. And what we mean by that is that there are more firms saying that their sales and orders are increasing or have increased than there are those that have said that they've decreased or aren't going so well. And that's also true in terms of investment plans. More firms have revised up their investment plans than have revised down. And that's both in terms of plant and machinery investment, but also investment in the workforce as well. So training staff, essentially. A majority of firms in Q2 2021 attempted to recruit, 55% of them did. And a large majority of firms are very confident that their turnover profitability will increase in the future. Now, the reason that these numbers are important and good and positive is that in comparison to previous quarters, they are very high. So over previous quarters, for example, in the number of firms that have attempted to recruit, we were down at around 44%. and now we've gone up to 55%. So there is positive signs there in relation to growth. And that is very true also in terms of cash flow, which is the focus of today's discussion, or a big focus as well. And here's a chart representing the results of the cash flow question in the QES over the last 6 quarters. And we ask firms whether their cash flow position has improved or worsened or remained the same. And as you can see, they're represented by different coloured bars on the chart there. Now, what I want to draw your attention to, first of all, is the orange bars and the dark orange bars, I guess, on the right-hand side of each quarter. So going to Q2 2021 and the right-hand dark orange bar there, you'll see that around 19% of firms in South Yorkshire felt that their cash flow position had worsened in that period. But a great number more thought that it had almost double a proportion thought that it improved, that green bar there in that quarter too. So if you compare the dark orange bars going back, and you go all the way back to Q2 2020, that dark orange bar is very, very high. It's up at around 63%. And that Q2 2020 is one of these important periods I talked about, because that is the start of April 2020, when 2 weeks previous to that, or roughly, we just started lockdown and the shutdown measures that the government had implemented post-pandemic. So you can very clearly see the enormous shock that was on the economy at that point in time. And then going right from that point through Q3 2020, Q4 2020, and the start of this year, it stabilizes a little bit, but still isn't great. And then as we get into Q2, it's improved a bit. Now, this is represented by this blue line at the bottom and the points on that, because this blue line represents whether overall businesses are saying things have improved or worsened. If it's negative, below 0, things have worsened. If it's positive, things have got better. And as you can see, this quarter, it's the first time that overall firms are saying their cash flow position has improved for the first time since Q1 2020, which is January to March. Now, there are other things to consider within cash flow from other data sources that suggest this isn't just a one-off. There's other sources to suggest that firms are increasing their reserves, that their cash flow positions have improved. But there are, I guess, some things to be slightly wary of, and things to kind of point the direction in saying it's not all universally positive. And there are some quite important points here on this slide. So first of all, there are price pressures coming from raw materials costs. We have an open text question in the QES, which allows firms just to say anything they like about what's on their mind, really, and quite a number of those related to the costs of raw materials. And we know from other data as well that those raw materials costs, it's spread a lot far and wide, really, in terms of metal, fuel, timber, all kind of types of construction costs are rising and causing problems for firms and on the mind of firms, which leads into concerns about inflation as well. Now, interestingly, the other major concern of firms this quarter was highlighted as corporate taxation. Around a fifth of firms said that they were concerned about it, or it was on their mind, essentially. Whereas if you go back to the start of 2020, only 2% said it was an issue. Now, speculation here, but it could be something like government support measures winding down, or that's uncertainty that Andy talked about where taxation policy is going, which might mean that it's more at the forefront of businesses' minds. It could be the fact of having to pay tax in the future is something that will affect firms as well. But it was quite notable how that was an issue for firms this quarter. It could also be something like looking into the future and thinking we spent a lot of money on the pandemic, that's going to need to be paid for at some point through additional taxation, and maybe that will come back to bite us. The third point here is around recruitment and the labour market picture more generally. Firms were trying to recruit, they expected to increase their workforce, but again, very notable was the difficulties that firms were having in recruiting skilled and professional workers. It was very high in historical terms. Around 40% of firms were saying they were having these recruitment difficulties for this category of worker, which is more than double the proportion than historically has been the case. The other categories of worker in terms of manual workers or unskilled workers were roughly historically in line. So there's something going on here in the labour market for skilled and professional workers in South Yorkshire. And the final point on this slide is a very important point, because although the indicators across the quarterly economic survey, a number of them are saying this indicates growth and that we're bouncing back and coming out of the pandemic and the economy is repairing, the capacity figure shows that we're not anywhere near where we were, and there's some way to go. Only 44% of firms are operating at full capacity, whereas pre-pandemic that figure was 57%. And that should be really a kind of warning sign for policymakers and those thinking about the support that firms need in saying, okay, it's not just the fact that things are growing, but ultimately they've got a long way to grow before we can say repair has happened and we are now where we were before. So there is some way to go there. And finally, just a quick note on the South Yorkshire versus the national picture. They're very similar. Indicators are pointing more or less in the same direction. But in South Yorkshire, the positive numbers seem to be just a little bit stronger in terms of confidence, in terms of orders, in terms of investment. So, for example, confidence increase, turnover was 10 percentage points higher in South Yorkshire than nationally. And the final point I'll make before handing back to Mike is that the concerns of South Yorkshire business are the concerns of national businesses, certainly in this quarter, and that specifically relates to raw materials costs. That was a big theme in the national survey, with lots of quotes from manufacturers in particular talking about these costs and how it was the thing that was quite notable in the challenges that they were facing at present. So I'll leave it there, and if there are any questions about the survey, then please do let me know. There is an infogram link that I think we can send a link round with or give access to, which shows all the detailed breakdown of the results and how they've performed over the last 6 quarters. So you can get that real sense of pre-pandemic Q1 2020 to Q2 2021 now, because it's quite an interesting picture.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, and just to reiterate that there's obviously a lot of information that's contained within the QES. You can peruse that at your leisure with the online tool that we have, and maybe there are other aspects of this that you want to have a look at too. And yeah, that will all be included in all of the promotion of the QES in and around this. So without any further ado, I'm going to move on to Gary. Gary, do you want to say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into the presentation. I'll just put that up on my on my screen.
Excellent, thanks, Mike. So yeah, I'm Gary. I'm director at Shorts Accountants, sort of heading up the Genus team, which looks at everything from providing management accounts, reviewing back office and accounting systems, right through to providing sort of client CFO or finance directors to come in on sort of a part-time basis, if you like, and really be an integral part of our clients' businesses. So yes, I'm really pleased actually to be asked to speak today about cash flow. So it's something I'm quite passionate about, and a topic that gets covered a lot with our clients. So yeah, I think today I'm sort of going to cover 3 areas of cash flow, if you like. I'm going to talk about raising funds, retaining cash within the business, and then looking at increasing cash. So I think if we jump into the first topic, so raising funds, and I think this is very topical now, as has been mentioned. You know, there's been a lot of government support out there. So we've had the Beebles and Seables loans. You know, we've had furlough schemes and all this government support, which has supported businesses through a very difficult time. And if we look at one of the stats, I think it's our region's businesses are now 38% more indebted over this last year. So that's got to be because of the availability of these government-backed loans. The more sort of pressing thing now for me on this is the deferred payments on these loans. So we've had 12 months of not having to make payments and having these funds come into the business. Some people have then extended that by an additional 6 months, which was great. You know, I think the pandemic went on longer than anybody expected, and is still ongoing. So it's now sort of taking stock of where we are and saying, okay, so we need to repay this now. We've got a monthly payment due. What does this mean for us? You know, how is it going to impact our cash? And actually, do we have the funds there to make these repayments? So if we don't, we then need to plan for something. It's no good, you know, burying heads in sand. We need to talk to the providers of this finance and, you know, assess the situation and look at other options, and really plan for these repayments so that it doesn't creep up on us. And almost linked to that, when we look at raising cash, so the main thing is actually planning in advance. I've seen a stat previously where the majority of businesses actually start to look for finance just 7 days before it's required. So if you think about that, it's almost a rush decision, and doesn't really give us time to look at our options and assess which one's the best for the business. So for me, I think if we can try and take control of that almost and say, well, let's plan in advance, let's take control of financing our business, and that should allow us to sort of enable us to get the right amount of funds at the right time for the business and at the right price that we can afford. And all of those will then link to the right product. So on raising funds, it's not just bank loans and the traditional financing. There's plenty of options out there. So I think Andrew Gates was just speaking about a few funds and stuff that's becoming available. You know, so it's looking at those. Don't necessarily just jump straight into going and talking to your bank and raising a traditional loan. That could actually be quite costly. So you know, looking at revolving credit options, which give you that bit more flexibility, looking at grants that are available and, you know, government funds that are available across our region can all bring money into the business at the right time. So yeah, I think just to summarize on raising funds, I think the main point for me is plan in advance, so that you're getting the right funds at the right price. So if we go on to point 2 then, which is retaining cash within the business. And I think often businesses overlook the credit control aspect of the finance team. So, you know, you go out, the team does the hard work, they get the job done, and then often it takes far too long to receive the cash in, or even worse than that, we just don't receive it at all. So sort of looking at this and making it an easy to manage process will embed it within the business. So there's plenty of technology out there. It doesn't have to be this time consuming person on the phone ringing all your customers and asking them to pay. Just take advantage of the technology that's available. There's plenty of online platforms that can streamline this and automate a lot of it for you. So, and it needs to start right at the beginning. So we're taking a customer on, we should be credit checking them, you know, what credit score have they got? And then it sort of goes on through that. So, you know, yes, we go out, we do the job, and then we've completed the job. Do we wait 2 weeks before sending the invoice? If so, we need to bring invoicing as close to the actual work being completed as possible. And if it's that longer project, then look at raising invoices as you go along, whether that's based on, you know, periods of time or stage of completion, because the sooner you can invoice, the sooner you'll get paid. So, and then just to keep it forefront of customers' minds, send them reminders for the due dates, you know, just friendly. And this is something you can automate, you know, a friendly email saying, oh, your payment's due with, you know, in the next 7 days. If you need anything, contact us. And then another reminder saying, no, your payment's due today. And then obviously that can then scale up if they do go overdue, and can put a bit more pressure on to get that cash in. And then if we look at the flip side of that, is sort of utilizing available terms from your suppliers. So this isn't me saying pay everybody late. I don't think that's a good idea at all. I think it's just bad business and will annoy your suppliers. But almost taking a review of what's available to you. So particularly on your key suppliers that you'll have a really good relationship with, there could actually be some incentives there around, you know, early payments or similar other incentives. And it's sort of saying, well, if I normally pay on 30 days, well, if I pay on 20 days, I'll get X percentage discount. Great. You know, that retains physical cash within our business. It makes something cheaper for us. So it's not always just, okay, well, I'm going to pay on 30 days because that's my available terms. It's looking at the other options there and taking a real review of those. And that will keep the right amount of money within our business to start with, hopefully. So, and I think just on those 2 points then, so we should also be tracking our debtor and creditor days. And the reason this is important is it almost shows a gap that the business needs to finance. So the bigger the gap, the bigger the financing requirement for that business, because almost the difference between them is a time period where you're paying out before you're receiving cash in from your business. So, you know, the things I've just mentioned, looking at invoicing more regular, reducing payment terms for your customers and things like that, these will all improve those debtor and creditor days. And then if you're a stock holding business, that then adds that other layer of complexity in there, because you could be, you know, paying for stock today, not selling it for 30 days, and then not receiving cash for another 30 days from your customers. So you can see how this builds up and becomes a real drain on cash for businesses, and it can become a real issue. So just being aware of it, you know, even if you think, well, I can't reduce my payment terms for customers, they just won't do it. You know, just being aware and having the knowledge of what it is for your business will help. And then I think just on the last point on retaining cash then is actually a lot of businesses and sort of business directors will look at it and go, okay, we need more cash in. How do we do that? Right, we need to make more sales. And it's almost that default position of, to get more cash, we need more sales. But actually, if you've got a bit of a rocky foundation, it's maybe not the most sensible thing to do is just keep adding sales on top. If you then look at, well, where's this cash going once it's in? You know, can we review overheads and reduce the amount of cash going out to start with? And therefore, we can make more money out of the same amount of sales. I think one of the stats, and I may get this number wrong, that Steve was going through is, I'm sure it said, businesses are expecting or are positive about a turnover increase, and I think that was 70% of businesses across our region. Yet a profit increase, I think, was something like 62%. So for me, it's interesting that there's more businesses expecting more turnover than expecting an increase in profit. Now, ideally, the two would be the same. The more turnover we have, the more profit we make. Obviously, you've got to take account of the last 18 months and say, well, we're starting from almost a negative position. We've got to catch up first. So it may be that we need to cover certain costs that aren't being covered yet because of the situation that we're in. And I think a good thing on that is just to look at a burn rate of cash. So how many months overheads do we have sat in cash? And that will then give you a bit of a comfort blanket, hopefully, or alternatively a huge stark warning that there isn't enough cash there. But again, I think a lot of the stuff that I'll say may not actually change things within the business, but it just gives you the knowledge. And I think having the knowledge at least gives you that power to understand what's happening, where's the cash going, and if something needs changing, you can change it from an informed position. And just lastly on the overheads point is just review them. Look at, can we cut any unnecessary ones? But on that, also look at the value add for the business, because you don't want to cut costs and then be in a worse position in 3-6 months' time. Look at renegotiating costs with suppliers, particularly as we've seen, people are really concerned about direct costs going up, so materials costs and things like that. And it's something that we are seeing and our clients are nervous about. So, if you've got a key supplier, for example, that you get 30% of your materials from, can we almost contract that and agree a price that's not going to increase over this next 6 months, so that you know where you are and you can plan for that. So yeah, hopefully all those will then help you retain cash within your business. If we then flick on to the last point within cash flow, so increasing cash, and I think this I put this purposely after retaining cash because I think it's a nice follow-on. I'd look at the bits around retaining cash that we've just spoke about, so that you've got a really good foundation, and then look at, right, I've got that foundation, how do we increase cash? So for me, increasing cash and increasing a positive cash flow is mainly about planning, which I'm sure you'll be fed up of me banging on about now, but starting with that company strategic vision, building out, right, what are our objectives, what are the goals that we need to do to achieve those objectives. That really allows us to understand where to focus our cash and our efforts to get the maximum results. So if we, and I'm a huge advocate of not just having it in your head, get it out and get it documented. So if that's on paper, if that's online, just get it out of your head, get it documented. And I think that allows you to be clear on it then, and enables communication across the business as well. So when you're making changes, particularly around reducing costs and things, if you've got buy-in fully across the business, you're much more likely to succeed on that. Because, the guy on the shop floor, he's bought into it and he's not wasting material, for example, because we've got a target of this to achieve. So it just buys everybody into that. And then almost linked to planning is forecasting. So it's such a powerful tool, especially when coupled with a strategy. And it really allows visualization of what the cash position is and what it's likely to be, particularly if we make certain changes. yes, this is the impact on finance, and this is what it'll look like going forward for the cash and the profit and loss account. And then you can team that together with, right, how does that affect the operations side? And is this a good decision? And almost putting the strategy, the forecasting, and the operations side of the business together, you can build out a business roadmap and fully understand, right, we're making this decision. How is that going to impact, the operations? How does it impact the finances? And when's the right time to make that then? So for example, okay, we need a new staff member. This is what they'll be able to deliver, so we can build that in, and this is what it's going to cost. And then you can see, right, we can afford to do that now, or actually we need to wait 3 months. And then I think another way to increase cash is to really focus on the operational efficiencies. So it's not about huge changes. It's not, completely redoing processes and how you work. It's about looking at where are the small wins, and then those compound effect of small wins become a bigger impact on the business. So for example, if you can increase utilization rate of a machine or a department by 1%, then this will hopefully generate a higher income, more profit, and therefore more cash. Or alternatively, reviewing our process around waste management. So, materials costs are going up. Let's make sure our waste is as low as possible. Again, reduce that by 1%, reduces our costs and increases our cash. So it's often starting by mapping out the processes for the business and then working through them to see what can be improved and where the most impact will come from. So hopefully throughout that you've found that useful, and there's some practical takeaways to sort of help you in either raising funds, retaining cash, or increasing your cash flow. And I'd just say, if you do want to talk about anything around cash flow or business processes, then feel free to reach out to me at Shorts. So thanks everyone. Back over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Gary. I mean, I was going to say, I was quite taken actually about your point of just the importance of being able to visualize your financial position and understand how it's evolving as circumstances change. And I think that there's research that shows actually quite a shockingly high percentage of small businesses don't have that ability, even with all of the accounting tools that many of us have these days. And that's a real message I think we all need to reinforce, isn't it?
Yeah,
thanks for that, Gary. Some really good, strong tips about how to manage cash flow as we move into an odd period, I suppose, economically. And I thought that's a good sort of jumping off point to pick up some of the questions that have come through as you were presenting, and maybe that we can open that up into a broader discussion based on everything that's been presented here today. So if I can kind of pick out some questions and then fire them at people, hopefully that is going to be okay. So I'm going to pick one from Lisa, who's on the call, who put a question around, or made an observation around the impact of COVID right now, and the impact of staff absences, either through getting the disease or having to self-isolate, and some of the impacts that could have on business. So can I pick on, Andy, can I pick on you first, just because I know the LEP maintains a kind of oversight of the COVID impacts across the South Yorkshire economy. Does that resonate in some of the data that you're picking up? Is that kind of experience more really common across the area?
Good question. I don't know if the data's showing it yet, but this is where anecdotal stuff is more valuable sometimes than waiting for the data, because I don't actually know what data would be captured for us to be able to report it. But I was looking at something the CBI put out. They do some business insight work, and they are flagging this nationally. You know, and some of the things they're asking for really, I mean, is for more certainty and confidence in the isolation system and how it works. So, you know, it needs to be more agile and more responsive. You know, how do you combine lateral flow tests with PCR tests where you're symptomatic, so you can get people back into work quicker, and also the efficacy of those existing workplace testing regimes. How good are they? What are they capturing? And so there's got to be a tweaking of how it all works, whilst we sort of retaining that focus on public health and safety. So I suppose the short answer is I don't know, because I don't think I've seen, and we haven't got any data on it, but it is clearly, and it's really good that Lucy flagged it, an issue we need to understand a bit more, and particularly whether there are sectors and businesses in South York. So one of the reasons South Yorkshire's levels have always been a bit higher is because we've got workplaces that are more conducive to coronavirus spreading. So that's why we haven't been able to stamp on all of the sort of hot spots of COVID. So it is an issue we have faced all the way through. I don't understand it enough though, so it may be something we take away with colleagues from the Chamber and the business groups to try and get under the skin of it a bit more.
Thanks, Andy. Can I also pick on Dan and Andrew just to get their perspectives on kind of what they're picking up from members, because we hear a lot about schools, for instance, and the impact of having to manage outbreaks and self-isolation in those kinds of organisations, and the potential knock-on impacts that has on employers of parents and so on. But is that something that you're picking up more broadly? Andrew, can I start with you? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just to pick up on Andy's last point there about South Yorkshire and the issues that it has in terms of the workplace. One of the other things as well, and I think people will be aware of this if they've been looking at some of the details that have been coming out over the last 12, 18 months, is that South Yorkshire is one of those parts in the United Kingdom where there are fewer and fewer opportunities to actually work from home as well, such as the nature of the workplace, the environment in our part of the world, that, you know, and I've said it and others have said it before, you know, it's easy for people who are pontificating in London and making regulations saying work from home, where possibly in the southeast there is much more opportunity to be able to do that. Certainly in our part of the world, it's not as easy as that, and people simply haven't had that choice available to them. They've either had to go into work or not work at all, and as a consequence possibly not even get paid. I think we just need to be aware of that. I think the other point, again, going back to Gary's presentation about businesses and the ability to access cash and the need simply to continue, you know, again, those of us who've been involved on a number of these calls over the past few months will be aware of the amount of times businesses have said to us, or indeed we've had it relayed to us, that, you know, they're almost in survival mode, and, you know, businesses have done remarkably well to simply survive so far, but there is only so far that, you know, there's only so much they can take, and that's why I was quite interested. I just pinged a question up earlier about the impact that government loans, either the CBILS or the bounce back loans, either good or bad, what kind of impact that had on having access to money relatively quickly. I mean, the experience we've had as a business is that we were able to access money relatively quickly. But of course, where it's a loan, that's still on the book and it's got to be paid back at some stage. And, you know, as everybody on this call will know, if they've had a loan, that has now started. The process now of paying back, certainly bounce back loans, has now started. So we're moving from one kind of a area into another now, where you've had the money, it was made relatively easy, but now you've got to start paying it back. and that obviously, as Gary's indicated earlier, that has an impact on cash flow as well. So I'm sure, Gary, you may get some inquiries, if not just from people on this call, about businesses looking at managing their cash flow, but also having to pay back government loans as well.
Thanks, Andrew. I wonder if at this point I could bring in Gary as well, because I was thinking as we were putting these presentations together that, so we've talked about some of the things that, and that some of the chickens that are coming home to roost, as it were, and the government guaranteed or sponsored loans obviously is one example of that. But there are other things as well that kind of fall into that category. So just to take my own business, one of the things that has kind of a chicken that has come home to roost is those kind of initial easements on rental payments, for example, where because you're not actually physically occupying space, an arrangement that's now come to an end. So where you have those kind of supplier arrangements, Gary, that you noted specifically in your presentations, I assume those would be an example of some of the other kind of things that are going to crop up in the coming months. But do you get a sense of from your client base, kind of what the scale of this is and how people are managing those kinds of pressures?
Yeah, I think, there's been so much government support out there that actually, these loans or the furlough schemes, if it wasn't for those, what the impact would have been, we'd dread to think. I think there's so many businesses that have survived because of those schemes, and it's just been very mindful of that as those come to an end, and as we say that the repayments are due, or we've now got the full cost of a staff member that we didn't have months ago, but is there the full work there? So it's almost trying to be a little bit clever and thinking outside the box, although I hate that term. But if, like you say, on the rental side of stuff, right, we're renting an office, but we can, we've got people still working from home, and their mindset is that they don't want to be back in the office full time. Is there a subsection of that office that we now no longer need, and can we sublet that, for example? I was out at a client last week, and they've done exactly that. There was a part of the office sublet to another company because they just no longer needed it. It wasn't being utilised. So that then brings that burden of cost of renting a big premise down slightly. And I think there's no one thing that is going to, or in majority of cases, there's no one thing that is going to help support that business. It's almost pulling together a lot of different things, and it's subletting a part of the office isn't going to make your business survive, but it might just help a little bit. So it's looking at all those things.
Thanks, Gary. Just a follow-on point from Lisa that it'd be good if you could have a go at, and that's around the opportunity to stall the repayments for e-bills. With these government-sponsored loans, what are the options around managing the repayments? And and linking back to your earlier point about cash flow, what options do businesses have there?
Yeah, so there was obviously the initial 12 months, and then from memory, I think everybody was then entitled to apply for 6 months extended, where you don't make a repayment. I'm not aware of any sort of blanket scheme where there's any further extension on that. But banks are businesses. They ultimately want you to keep paying, even if it's not the full amount, because they're earning their interest and they're getting some cash back in. So I think it's just about then chatting to whoever the bank manager is, or whoever your finance account support is, to say, this is a position we're in. who can we reach out to, what can we do, and yeah, just having that conversation with the bank or the loan provider.
Thanks. I think Andrew and Phil have both put their hands up. Andrew, I think you were first, so I'll go to you and then go to Phil after you, if that's okay.
Just very quickly, just to pick up again on Gary's comment about banks. Absolutely right. They are businesses. They're not benevolent societies. You can get a 6-month extension, but you will be charged interest on that, whereas on the first 12 months it was interest free. The other interesting thing is, if you'll excuse the pun, if you want to try and pay back the loan, having had one but not used it, it's very, very difficult to do that. You're told it's a straightforward process. Trust me, it's very difficult to pay back the loan, and you almost get the sense that they're encouraging you to keep it on so that they can charge you interest on the loan. So you look at it from the bank's point of view. The longer you've got that money, the more they're making out of you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Phil, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a brief one from me. Just to respond to something Andrew said as well in the comments. We're in the tech space, but we took a bounce back loan last year around July time for 30,000. We're looking that it's completely remained untouched for us. It's just been a level of confidence. We've had that cash there. We haven't tried paying it back yet, so that's an interesting point. So we'll cross that bridge. It was just to add to Gary's. My background before joining this business was business and corporate finance. So I come from a business banking background. So there are options there to actually extend the terms as well. It was initially a kind of 6-year term that you could take a lot of these loans for, as well as the payment holidays that's been mentioned, and Andrew quite rightly says you can take a break, although interest will still be payable. There are options to speak to your lenders and potentially restructure it over a term of 10 years. So there are a couple of different options as well. So it's best to speak to your advisor, speak to the bank manager, and see what options you've got. I'm going to go away now and speak on Andrew's point and find out how you pay the thing back a little bit easier. But yeah, definitely speak to your advisors early, because there are other options like extending it. If you've got to pay it back, you can probably reduce the payments that way as well.
Make sure you've got your original password that they gave you 12 months ago, Phil, else you will find it virtually impossible to even have a conversation with anybody.
I can say with a level of confidence we probably don't, because it was taken out by one of our directors who I can guarantee doesn't have that. So yeah, that'll be an interesting
As long as you've still got the money, you'll be all right. He's not taking the money with him, has he?
No, it's still there. Cheers, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And just another one going back to Lisa's earlier comment. So around this kind of, how do you, I mean, it's been great to talk about cash flow today and get into the, some of the issues around how you can manage it better. But what can we do to kind of raise the level of knowledge of finance for non-financial managers? And are there some things you can think of, Gary? Maybe the Dan and Andrew on the call, if there are events that you do through the chamber that help, or programs through the chamber that help with that. It'd be good to kind of put those out into the open. Shall I start with Dan? You look like you're keen to talk. Yeah.
I have to come in on that, Mike. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things here. We're still at the point of really, as a region, operationalising some of the support measures that will come to sit alongside the renewal action plan and the strategic economic plan that we have for the area. And I think one of the things we're sort of really keen to do through this sort of refreshed partnership between the chambers and Andy and his colleagues is to sort of really sort of real world some of the policy design that we're seeing in the area, and to sort of try and figure out how we can sort of make the region's provision, support mechanisms, etc., as SME friendly as possible. So I think every little bit of insight that we get from something like this plays into that and sort of helps provision be better in the future. So I think there's a immediate bit of learning there for us all. Then I think the other thing is just to consistently and often ask for help. Government seems to have this sort of centralized stance of, we're taking the brakes off the economy, we're winding down all the big interventions, it's a big rollback. But actually there's still a plethora of stuff that's available through the Growth Hub, the Skills Bank, the chambers, the other business organisations, the toolkits that you referred to, Mike, you know, the professional services sector out there. I mean, one of the things that we don't do in business very readily is say, I don't know, I've not encountered this before, I'm a bit stuck, and can someone help me, please? But actually, that's a really brave and honourable thing to do. And there's lots of people out there that if you reach out to can help and guide us through this. So I think for me, the you know, it's not a big cold nugget, but the advice is just always ask someone for help. And if you talk particularly to any of the public sector type organisations, they will actually join the dots for you. You know, we're very quick to say these things don't talk to each other and things aren't joined up. It's not actually that true. Once you talk to someone, they'll navigate you into a whole range of organisations that can help and add value.
Yeah,
great. Thanks, Tom.
If I could just add
Gary.
to that, sorry, Mike. Great. So I think, yeah, we've worked with clients alongside like different chamber regional funding and things like that, where there might be grants available to help improve processes or systems, or, you know, upskill staff. So it's definitely worth talking to either, you know, your accountants or the different chambers, whichever one's relevant to you, to sort of see what support's out there. And it could well be that, you know, you get some support for either free or part funded or whatever it is, which always helps. But I think, yeah, for the way I look at it, so I do work, the majority of the stuff I do within Shorts is going out to clients and working as sort of a client CFO or client finance director, whichever terminology you want to use. And for me, it's around empowering the staff members with data and easy to interpret data. You know, it's no good firing a load of accountant speak at your operations manager, because they'll just walk away not having a clue what I've just said. So almost going back to that strategic plan and saying, right, this is what we want to achieve. How do we achieve that? And breaking that down into the tasks and going, right, well, you know, if we want to achieve this, then this is the measure for it. Using that, setting that as a target for that individual in a way that they understand, you know, and someone in quality control or they understand that, okay, the waste needs to be at this percentage, or okay, right, I understand that. And then feeding that back to them to say, okay, so last month, you know, we're in week 1 of new month. Last month it was 5% higher than that. You know, what happened last month? Because the data is not going to tell you everything. So it's having those conversations and those reflections and saying, what happened there? How do we improve it? You know, how do you knock 1% off that? And doing it in a way that non-finance person can understand, and just building their knowledge over time. You're not going to take a non-finance person to understand the finances overnight, but they'll understand the key bits that they need to know to help them, you know, achieve what they need to achieve in their role. So yeah, that's something I'm really passionate about. And just lastly, to add on to that, a quote that I keep quite close to hand is sort of the business utopia. It's sort of entitled, and it says that imagine being able to empower every member of staff in your business with the ability to own their role using data, knowing directly how their work has contributed towards the overarching strategy of the business will not only provide them with personal validation, but it would help them buy into your company's vision. And I think that's quite a powerful quote to keep in mind, really. Because people want to turn up to work and know that they're doing a good job. So sort of reporting that back to them allows them to understand that.
Thanks, Gary. We've got a couple of minutes before we start to kind of get into the final reflections bit. So first of all, has anybody got any other questions that they'd like to throw out into the out for discussion before we go any further? Anyone who hasn't spoken yet or have something they want to put? If you do, just raise your hand and we can do it that way. Anyone got Okay. In that case, what I'll do is I'll finish off with one last one around. So I think this was a comment that came up in the on the message board, which was to do with the QES. So the field work for the QES closed, I think it was at the end of the first week of June. So obviously there's been a month since then. Steve, is there anything you wanted to highlight around kind of developments we ought to be looking out for, or things that have happened within that last month that might kind of condition our view of the economy that you wanted to raise?
I think the one thing that is particularly interesting going forward, and how this plays out going forward, is the kind of sectoral split and experience of things going forward. Not just because of the things that have been mentioned in terms of the types of businesses in South Yorkshire and the nature of the local economy that it could affect, but more generally in terms of, what is the prospect of future lockdowns, and what impact does that have on confidence in certain sectors? I mean, certain types of businesses have clearly adapted to the world in which we live, pandemic world, better or more easily than others, just because of the nature of what they do. So that's one thing I think is key to look out for, is which sectors are being hit hardest. I think the other thing to look out for is this, the raw materials costs aspect of this QES, seeing how that develops over time. Is going to be interesting as well, because some of the wider data on this issue suggests that some businesses, or most businesses, think it's a relatively short-term to medium-term thing, not necessarily lasting that long, but there doesn't seem to be necessarily much basis for that. Ultimately, we don't know. So I think that is a particular concern as well. And then the final point I would make is there are so many different things and factors at play within the labour market and local labour markets as well, in terms of what's happening with furlough and the schemes there, but also how people are moving about within the economy and how people are going to get access to talent skills, and understanding what has happened over the last year and how that impacts on the things that we know happens when people try and recruit anyway, is going to be quite interesting. And that's where things like devolved skills funding within the city region may come well into its own, in terms of if there is a gap or an extended gap there in terms of skills provision. So they're the kind of three things that I would look out for: sectoral mismatches, I guess, the raw materials continuation, and the impact of the labour market.
Thanks, Steve. So what I'm going to do now is just ask Dan and Andrew to sort of do a few final reflections on what we've heard here today, and then I'll do a little wrap up at the end, if that's okay. So, Andy, can I start with you?
You can. It's helpful because I was just trying to work out quite how I brief the mayor and internal teams on sort of what the business community is saying. So I've sort of written it out whilst talking. My view is, so my takeaway, I suppose my summary, and please shout if I'm wrong here, is that businesses are continuing to make a Herculean effort. Some of them are doing really well. Many, and this is Andrew Dennis' point, many are still in survival mode. And that survival mode has been supported by an enormous amount of government support that's gone in. That is creating an increasingly positive business environment in South Yorkshire. And actually some of the biggest risks flagged are things like inflation worries and supply of materials. And, they are national and global issues. They're really important, but they're not issues that South Yorkshire individually we can't fix or have a long-term control over money supply through Bank of England activity. So growth is really fragile We can't take it for granted. I think the messaging to government and code from our politicians need to be, don't pull the rug from under the feet. There's that, there are some chickens coming home to roost, and let's make sure that we don't all sit there in Whitehall and think that the problem's over, we've fixed it. There is support out there. It's clear from colleagues from Shorts, the chamber networks, peers, and the publicly funded offer through things like the Growth Hub, that we have got that support out there to help businesses adapt, and that there is still a big job to do to help businesses adapt, come out of it the other side. And some of that is just good old-fashioned business support, helping them tie into support and networks that are available. Really struck by Lisa's intervention on that sort of impact of high COVID rates and impact on staff having to isolate, and tying that into Andrew's point about South Yorkshire being more exposed because we don't have the same ability of some of our workforce to work from home. So that will have a disproportionate impact on South Yorkshire, and I think that is something that our MPs need to know. We'll be briefing MPs in 2 weeks' time on a whole host of things, and I'm going to make sure that point is relayed to them because they can help represent us in South Yorkshire. And then I suppose wrapping up Dan's point about the longer term interventions we've set out in our strategic economic plan are still the right ideas. Tackling the structural weaknesses in parts of our economy and the sort of infrastructure that supports our economy, they all need fixing still, and COVID has exacerbated some of those issues, thrown a sort of spotlight on some of them, urban centre renewal being for me the key one. Our local authorities are all now fundamentally changing the way they think about their urban centres in a way that COVID has expedited that process. And I suppose the last thing for me, wrapping it all together, is that the government have got a spending review in autumn. This levelling up white paper. These are two major strategic interventions the government will make that will directly impact on South Yorkshire, both in the short term in terms of business support, availability of credit, looking at some of the things around bounce back loans and civils. We need to make sure that spending review and that levelling up white paper has the sort of the South Yorkshire sort of footprint running right through it, rather than them being the classic Whitehall thinks this, so this is what's going to happen. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Thanks for that, Andy. And Dan, if I can finish with you.
Absolutely, Mike. I was actually hoping Andy would have gone for another 30 seconds because I've got the window open and someone's just started mowing rather loudly outside, but I'm hoping that doesn't cut across too much. So yeah, for three concluding thoughts, I suppose, from my side, Mike, is that firstly, it's going to be a very strange summer ahead of us because of this lag between sort of the grand unlocking and some of the self-isolating changes that sort of come in later in August, and we've talked about the sector mix in South Yorkshire, with lots of that sort of being parts of that foundation economy that we've all actually reappraised the value of this last 18 months. So things like leisure, retail, hospitality, warehousing, distribution. There are lots of sectors there where you can't self-isolate effectively. And interestingly, we talked about skills a bit, and they are the sectors that are feeling some of those really acute challenges at the moment. So despite some of the high unemployment figures in the area, particularly things like youth unemployment, we're not making the case to people for careers in areas like leisure, hospitality, tourism, because people are sceptical about the sustainability of those jobs. And then in other areas, things like transport and distribution, they've been really hammered by Brexit and from a labour market point of view, and so those bits of the foundation economy that have kept us all going are really going to struggle, I believe, for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So that's a really key thing for me. And, and as a part of that, we have to really double down our efforts on sort of skill supply in the area. Now, things like the adult education budget that Andy talked about earlier, really key in that. Things like the bid the chambers have led on for local skills improvement plans, and we hope for a green light for the region on that this Thursday. That's a bid the chambers put in. All help in terms of tackle those long-term skills issues that help to sort of move our economy forward. So summer and skills, one reflection from me, Mike. The second one would be echoing Andy's comments from earlier about levelling up. You know, this region has a good strategic economic plan. You know, we're ambitious for our area. We know what we want to do, but we don't necessarily have all the bits of the toolkit that we need to do the job of that. You know, and for me, levelling up isn't just about government giving us scraps off the table or occasional infrastructure investment for big projects, as welcome as that is. It's about actually making us the masters and mistresses of our own destiny, and giving us the tools to deliver on our plan. And frankly, the way the government is doing levelling up at the moment on a really piecemeal, competitive, transactional basis isn't helpful. You know, we've got a long-term plan for the region, need long-term resource. So government can help South Yorkshire through that. And then the third bit for me, again, echoing earlier points, the here and now stuff, is support is available for business. You know, it's not always as well marketed, it's not always as visible as we like to be in the region. There's always ways we can improve that. But there's chambers, there's other business organisations, growth hubs, there's sort of online stuff, and there's fantastic professional services organisations out there who can give advice, guidance, and help. You know, so despite the fact that government is rowing back some of the big ticket items, help is at hand, and I'd encourage anybody today on this event or watching this event as a first port of call, reach out to their chamber and we'll navigate you in and broker you to the help that is available out there, because it's good quality and it's readily available.
Thanks, Dan. So just a few points from me to wrap everything up. Firstly, thanks everybody for being here today. It's been a good discussion. I hope you'll agree. Lots of interesting points that are really practical, as well as some of the sort of wider policy points that have come out. And there's been one or two messages as we've been speaking. Thanks again to Lisa for her contribution there, and the point about actually, as well as experiencing impacts as a business, your clients can experience them as well, and that can get back to you. And that's a point that I think hadn't been raised earlier. So thanks for that. In terms of kind of next steps, Dan said earlier, this is a recorded event. So what we want is for as many people as possible to view it. So this will be shared over the social media channels of each chamber. If I could ask you to support the event by giving, doing some nice social media comments and all the rest of it, that would be great too. And getting as many of your friends and colleagues to have a watch, and that would be fantastic. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. You've heard from Dan and Andrew kind of what they've taken away from it, and Andrew, what he's feeding back to the mayor, and kind of what leverage we have as a region to be able to shape our destiny in these strange times. And so we'll continue to keep you updated with that. So on that note, thanks again everyone for joining us. I know a few of my chamber colleagues are going to stay on for a kind of debriefing afterwards. So those of you who are doing that, please don't sign out. But for everybody else, thanks again, and hope to see you soon at an event in the near future. Thank you.